So we are ready to start working with the Redux. So before we actually get started, I would highly recommend you add the Redux dev tools to whatever browser you are working with. I am in Chrome, so I already installed this. But what Redux dev tools does is it lets us see our entire state within our tools. So if I go into inspect, we are going to get the tab once we have this extension and Redux tool dev tools. This tool is just going to allow us to see our store, see the different actions that are uh, firing off. It's going to help us understand what it's going to. So it's going to make working with our store a whole lot easier. And we are going to be referring to this in this tutorial. So I will highly recommend you add this. It's going to make for working with Redux a lot easier. So with that being said, let's go ahead and make some installs here. So I'm in my React application. So you can see I'm in a e-commerce, and then in my front end folder here, uh, so from here I'm just going to chain a few installs, and we are just going to do npm install. And the first thing we are going to add is Redux, which is the state management library. And the thing about Redux is it's not specific to Redux. It can be used with Angular, it can be used on its own. So for that, we are going to need a package called React Redux to connect the two. And we'll also add something called Redux Thunk. Thunk just allows us to make asynchronous requests from our action creators. It's sort of like a middleware to our store. So after Redux Thunk, we'll also need Redux DevTools, and we'll also add in extensions. So Redux DevTools extensions. And this is that library that's actually going to allow us to connect our store to that browser. So okay, that browser extension. So we are actually going to able connect it and then see it through this import or this function. So all of my packages finished installing. So now I want to start creating my store here. So we are going to go into front end, and within source there is different ways we can build our store. Some people like to just put it straight into index.js, but I want to keep things separate, and I want to make my store within its own file called store.js. So that's within my source folder at the root level. And before we actually start creating it, let's create some imports. So we'll just import first from Redux, and in here the first thing we will import is going to be create store. So this is kind of self explanatory. This is the function that creates our store. The next one is going to be combine reducers. So combine reducers, what this does is later on we are going to have multiple reducers for different parts of our application. It's going to take all of those reducers, it's going to combine them into one reducer. Then we are going to take that one reducer and apply it to our store. So it's just going to combine all of those into one large reducer. And then we also want apply middleware. So apply middleware, and this is going to be for Redux Thunk. So let's go ahead and actually import that now, and we'll just do important IMP for the shortcut for importing modules, and this is going to be from Redux uh, Thunk, and that's just going to be module name Thunk. So we'll allow this to import Thunk from Redux Thunk, and the last thing I want to do is add in that function that applies our store to the Redux dev tools. So let's just import that too. And this is going to be from Redux dash dev tools dash extensions, and the function itself is uh, going to be composed with the dev tools. So compose, we are going to camel case that compose with dev tools, And so let's go ahead and actually start creating our store now that we have our imports. So our store will just use a create store function, and we'll just set create store. And this this function is going to take in several parameters. So let's start adding those. The first one is going to be reducer, and we don't have our reducer yet, so we want to create that. We'll just say const reducer, and our reducer is going to be using the combined reducers function. Okay, so we don't have any reducers yet, so for now it's just going to be an empty object, and then later on we will pass in our reducers as key value pairs here, and we'll also need our initial state. So let's pass that in, and our initial state, and we have not created it yet, so it's just going to be an empty object, and we'll create that right here and leave it just like that. So let's go ahead and actually move on to applying some middleware. So if I turn on my server right now, I want to show you something. We'll just do npm start, and I want to take a look at my Redux dev tools, and then we will actually apply the store here. So I will close out this other one. Let's go into inspect. And if we look here, not in security, but within Redux, we are still not seeing our store here. And we still need to configure it so we can follow these instructions here. But we are going to use our own method. So Lord, let's go back and actually apply it within here. So in initial state, or within our create store function, right after initial state, we are going to uh, use our compose with dev tools and apply middleware function to actually apply it. So we could just do something like this, where we do compose with dev tools. I want to create some space here so we can see it, and then I will just do apply middleware. And in theory, we could just pass in thunk like that. But because we want more than that, we want to be able to actually use multiple or apply more middleware. So in here, I'm just going to create a variable, and then we will actually create a list for that. So we'll just say middleware, and inside of middleware, we are just going to pass in thunk as a list like that. Now we can just go and take this middleware function, and I'm going to use a spread operator. We'll spread it out through here, and that should be enough to actually apply it. So let's go ahead and actually start implementing our store in the front end here, or to our actual application. So we'll just do export default, and then we'll export our store. Okay. And we want to add this into index.js. And what we are going to do is we are going to import our store into index.js, and then we are going to use something called a provider, and we are going to wrap up our entire store with a provider. So that way our store is going to be available within all the components in our application. So the first thing is going to be our provider. So we'll just import from React Redux, and this is going to be that provider. So that's going to be capital P here, provider, and this is component. And then after that, we'll just import from our Redux store. So dot forward slash store, we'll import the actual store. So I'm just going to remove React strict mode, and we are going to change this to our provider. So we are just going to wrap it in our provider instead of that and into the provider. What we need to do is we need to pass in the store, and we will pass in the actual store itself. So we are going to pass it in as a parameter. And now when I save this, let's go ahead and look into our Redux store. So we can actually see something. So we can see our store here. If we go into row, we'll go into our state. We can see that we have that empty object as our initial state. So we have officially created our store and applied it to our application, and we can move on from here. So we can see our state, we can see our Redux dev tools, and everything is configured for now. In the next video, what we are going to do is we are actually going to start creating our actions, our reducers, and start actually applying data into our store and start building out this state. So right now our initial state is an empty object, but we are going to start applying reducers and state to our store and actually start building this out, calling real data and loading it into our store.